When I was 15, I lived in a nursing home. My mom worked there. At the time, we were living in an already haunted home that was falling apart. We had to move out fast, and my mom was close with the owner of the facility that she worked at. The owner knew about our situation and offered for us to stay at the facility. There was an entire wing of rooms that had not been used in years. It was kept clean, but no one stayed in it. The owner of the facility told my mom that we could have the last 2 rooms at the end of the hallway, across from each other. The doors to the wing were big, heavy ones that were really loud when they were being used. The staff and residents didn't use this wing because there was nothing in there for anyone. It was just rooms with beds. Things were fine for a while. The only thing that I felt for the first few months there was that our wing never felt empty. The walk down to our rooms felt creepy. It just felt like there were people looking at you. The first small thing that happened was one night, my little sister and I were goofing off with my mom's phone while she was working. We were recording ourselves talking in silly voices and making silly sounds. At one point, I had the phone recording, but my sister and I were silent. We didn't know what to do or say anymore. So, I stopped recording. The next day, we went through all of the recordings so we could hear how funny we sounded. I forgot about the last recording having no sound, and I played it. It was silent for a second, and then we heard a sound that was like someone drawing in a deep breath. We were shocked and really scared. The next thing that happened really scared me. It was nighttime and my mom was working. My sister was across the hall sleeping, and I was watching TV. It was a normal night, nothing out of the ordinary, when all of a sudden, the door to the room I was in started getting pounded on so heavily, it sounded like the door was going to bust down. I was startled and said, "Hello?" No one answered. As the pounding was going on, the door handle started shaking like someone was trying to get in. Mind you, I always left the door unlocked in case my sister woke up and needed me for anything. The pounding on the door was so violent and loud, I was afraid I was going to wake my sister across the hall. As it got louder and harder, I got scared, so I went and hid in the bathroom that was in the room. While I was in there listening to the ruckus, I thought, wait, if someone came into the wing, I would have heard the doors open and latch shut. I knew then there was no way there was an actual person banging on the door like that. It went on for about 5 minutes, and then it stopped abruptly. I was shaken, but went out into the hallway to see if there were dents in the door. There weren't, and there was no one out there either. I went in to check on my sister, and she was sound asleep. I went out and asked the staff if they had heard anything coming from our wing, and they said they hadn't. I even asked if a resident had somehow gotten into our wing, and they told me that everyone was in bed and accounted for. Nothing ever happened again while we lived there, luckily. On 4 separate occasions, myself and 3 other people have seen an entity in my apartment, of which 2 who saw it at my apartment describe as an older man in his 40s or 50s. The first time I was having a video call with someone while I was eating pizza in my kitchen. A few moments after I left the kitchen, my friend asked if I was going to share any with my roommate. I live alone. They described it as a black shadow in the background, and they didn't think much of it as much as just someone walking by. The second time, a girlfriend of mine claimed she could communicate with spirits. So I asked her to, and basically the conversation was very short, but it went along the lines of this. Her, are you there? Spirit, I'm here. Does he know about you? Yeah. Okay, bye. She got spooked, I guess, and cut it short. As we were leaving, she said he was staring at us from my porch. an older man. Third time, I had a friend over who said they were sensitive to spirit's energy and could communicate. The second we walked in my apartment, she felt the energy and said he was harmless, but just lonely. She felt him in the kitchen, and when we were leaving, she said he was watching from the porch. I never mentioned another encounter to her before this. The fourth time, I was live streaming on Twitch. I wish I saved this clip because I looked at the corner of my screen and someone walked past behind me, coming from my kitchen to my porch. Looked like a black shadow, kind of. So today, I talked to a medium. Now, before I say what she said to me about the spirit, I never gave her any details on my experiences with this spirit. I never told her any of the other encounters other people have had. She claims it was a middle-aged man named Joe. He died of a heart attack sometime in the 90s. At first I was like, okay, sure. But then she said a couple of things that caught my attention. She said that he likes my pets, which is funny because I swear I always see my cat looking up at someone. But I mean, it could just be my mind running with the thought. But sometimes I swear the cat is looking at someone. Another thing that was mentioned, he liked my guitar. He had one like it. My guitar is a 90s Peavey, which would make sense if he had supposedly died sometime in the 90s. The other thing, and she said that he said this with a smile, is that he likes pizza. This is what really caught my attention. The first encounter I had with him, he was behind me in the kitchen while I was eating pizza and video chatting with a friend. I asked her what he didn't like that I did, and she goes, he doesn't like it when you play loud music. I play in a rock band, and we used to practice in my spare room. Needless to say, it got pretty loud there. She says he's a good spirit, enjoys when I have company over, and just that he likes to make his presence known. Tonight when I got home, I went into my bedroom to lay down, and I felt a sudden rush of energy and emotion as I sat in my bed and my light started flickering in my room for a second. I think it was the spirit. Honestly, I'm not sure what to make of any of this, but I wanted to share this in a group of like-minded folks. I'd like to establish a direct communication with this spirit and learn more about it and who it was as a human. I have a couple ghost apps on my phone, but they seem really gimmicky. I was thinking of trying a Ouija board, but you know, that seems like it could be a whole other story. Anyone have any suggestions on how I could possibly form a better connection with the spirit I'm sharing an apartment with? Or any thoughts at all on this? She said his name was Joseph Swanson and likes to be called Joe. I don't know how long my landlord has owned this building, but I'm going to try to find out anything I can, if that person even exists. This happened about 8 years ago, and I've never told this story in its entirety. I was hanging out with one of my female friends one night, and we decided to go for a walk to a nearby park. We had a bottle of spiced rum that we planned on drinking once we got there, but we ended up having some on the way. The walk to the park was about 2 or 3 miles from where we started, and it took us a little over half an hour to get there. It was around 7 p.m. early fall in Minnesota, so it had just started getting dark when we got to the park. We're talking and drinking and messing around on the park equipment for a little while, before we decide to go sit on one of the benches they have there. It's getting a little later at this point and a bit cold when the sun is setting, so we just huddled up on the bench and continued drinking and talking for another good hour. The sun finally sets, and we're just having a casual conversation about God knows what, when we start hearing a low hum. Neither of us thought too much about it, thinking it's just construction or traffic or whatever, seeing as we're in a public park in a very populated part of town, with houses within throwing distance in any direction. We ignored it and continued our conversation as it got darker. We didn't really have a plan for what we were doing after, opting to just see where the night takes us. Here's where it gets weird. As we were just chilling on the bench, we were facing an open baseball field with minimal fencing. It's dark by now, and as we're talking, we start hearing the low hum again, but this time it's louder, and we can kinda hear which direction it's coming from. We both stop and look across the field and see what looks to be a shadow. We sit there and watch it for a second as it kind of sways, thinking maybe it's just a person. About 30 seconds pass and this thing starts getting larger and closer. We're freaking out now because this black mass is probably about 12 feet tall and maybe 6 feet across, coming towards us. It gets maybe within 20 yards of us and then nothing. I had blacked out, waking up the next morning on the porch of my mother's house about a mile away from where we were. I had a terrible headache, although that might have just been from the rum. My mom is freaking out, asking why I have cuts and bruises everywhere, thinking I got into a fight or something. I told her I had no idea. I sat there for a couple hours trying to recollect my night, trying to figure out what had happened. Then, I got a call from the friend I was with. She's in the hospital with a broken wrist and a few scrapes. She asked me what happened, and I didn't have an answer. She told me she didn't remember anything after the low hum and woke up in the hospital. To this day, I have no idea what actually happened that night. I've since lost contact with the friend I was with, but last time I talked to her, she had no more answers than me. I would love to know if anyone has had anything similar happen to them. Halloween is near, and here I am to boost the hype up for you guys. So all the horror movie fans out there, most of you might be familiar with the 2005 horror movie, The Exorcism of Emily Rose. But did you know that the movie is based on a true event that took place in 1975 in West Germany? The event is so shocking, a couple of sleepless nights are guaranteed. The incident is about a girl named Anneliese Michel. Born in 1952 in West Germany's Klingenberg. As a child, she was said to be brought up as a very religious girl by her Catholic parents. She was termed as a very bright young girl. Everything was okay until 1968, when the 16-year-old experienced her first epileptic seizure and experienced paranormal presence for the first time. Over the next 4 years, she experienced 3 more seizures, even after doctors examined her and found nothing severe to describe her condition. She was prescribed some medications, but that did little to no good to her. By 1973, Anneliese was already suffering from depression, but things got worse after that. She started hallucinating demon faces and hearing voices during praying that told her she was damned to rot in hell. She also complained about smelling feces and burnt objects which weren't there. Other persons would also state that they smelt the same smell too. She also exhibited intolerance to holy objects such as crucifixes, Bibles, holy water, and so on. She was unable to visit the church. It was reported that once, as she was walking towards a holy shrine, she felt the ground burning her feet as she walked. By this time, Annalise was convinced she was possessed and blamed her mother for it, because her mother had a child before marriage, and Annalise believed the curse for her infidelity passed onto her. Her parents by this time were also convinced she was possessed and contacted the local priest for an exorcism request, which was denied the first time. In the meantime, she started showcasing even stranger behaviour, such as hurting herself and her family, and also started consuming spiders, flies, and worst of all, her own urine. She also showcased inhumane strength, and is reported that she could throw her sister around the room as if she was nothing more than a rag doll. It's also rumoured that she once bit the head off a bird and ate it. She became even more sick considering the stuff she did, and blamed herself for all of it, stating this was all because of her past wrongdoings. The bishop in 1975 finally granted the Michel family's request for an exorcism. A priest named Arnold Renz was given the responsibility of performing the exorcism. The first exorcism was performed in September 1975, which was then followed by 60 plus more exorcism sessions. In the sessions, Annalise would scream in terrifying demonic voices and was said to be possessed by 6 demons named Lucifer, Cain, Judas, Hitler, Nero, and Fleischmann. Annalise eventually stopped eating as she stated the demons within her wouldn't let her eat. Her physical condition became very concerning as she not only lost weight and also became extremely sick, but surprisingly, she showed incredible strength even then. The exorcism sessions would benefit the poor girl very little, and she died on the 1st of July, 1976. It was reported that she predicted her death beforehand accurately. Her dead body was estimated to weigh only about 68 pounds. After her death, the 2 priests and the Michel parents were prosecuted and put on trial during 1978. The court was presented the tapes that the priests had recorded during the exorcism sessions. You guys can find some of the recordings on YouTube, but fair warning, the audio clips are extremely disturbing. The court ruled the 3 priests suspended for 3 years and fined them, but none of the 4 accused served any jail time. After that, the Michels requested the body of their daughter to be exhumed and buried again in a better funeral. Many thought that was the end of a horrific event, but they were very wrong. On June 6, 2013, the house where Annalise lived and died caught up in flames, and locals reported seeing a figure which was believed to be of Annalise. While the mayor said it was the work of teenagers, the terrifying part is it was the 6th day of the 6th month of the year 2013. 2 plus 0 plus 1 plus 3 equals 6. That's 666, or the devil's number. I had a wonderful childhood, exploring the woods in a rural, small village in Finland. We had so many beautiful places to play in, and we went through every nook and cranny. We had a lot of abandoned barns and houses, when the elderly didn't get anyone to continue the family business of running a farm. A lot of places were just forgotten. Also places which could not be sold because the location was too remote or houses too mouldy to fix. I miss the lovely ring of old spruces near my house. It was spooky how the trees grew in a perfect circle, and it sometimes got fairy rings of mushrooms inside it too. but that place got torn apart when a sparkling new road was built on it. Shame. So there were a lot of spots to check out, and we got them all memorized. We'd go through the whole village in a day sometimes, when we wanted to check out the same spot again. We played at an awesome place under willow trees, on the riverbank, or in the swing-shaped tree in the woods. Wherever we knew there was something cool. We knew the place like the inside of our pockets, but there was this one weird anomaly to that, and that is the bone pit. You could never find it twice again in the same place. First time we found it, I was 7 to 9 years old. I was playing in a small meadow near my cousin's house and stumbled upon a small pit on the ground, big enough for an adult to fit curled up in a fetal position. It didn't seem to have anything growing on it, and it had sun-bleached bones in it. They seemed to be swine bones, and they were in pieces, no skulls or ribs to be seen. I had found pig bones before, and even cow bones. They were sometimes the only signs that someone had lived there after the dilapidated houses had collapsed. This was at the meadow though, but still didn't think too much about it. I'd dumped bones a bit further away from the house too. Perfectly reasonable. But then something caught the attention of young little me, and I looked away from the pit. When I turned my attention back to it, having taken no more than 4 steps away from it, I couldn't see it there anymore. I did a circle around the area, and even parted some grass from the meadow, if the pit had somehow been covered or hidden by grass, but I just didn't remember it. No, could not find it. I yelled over at my cousin, who I was exploring with at the time, and told her what happened. She just shrugged and told me, yeah, it just disappears sometimes, and continued walking. She was in a very untrustworthy person, so I thought she was just yanking my chain again. I tried looking for it a bit more, even to just spite her for trying to fool me again. It had been on the meadow, on the edge of a dark old forest, but I couldn't find it anywhere near the woods. I went up and down the edge of the woods in search for it. I only stopped looking when my cousin had walked quite a distance away from me, so I had to run after her to catch up. I did find the pit again next year. I remembered it, and it looked the same as ever. No grass had grown inside it still. I wanted to inspect the bones closer, but decided against it, feeling a bit creeped at this point. I turned my back to tell my friends about what I found, standing still, except for turning my head, and when I looked back, it was gone. Most of all, I felt frustrated. I was pissed I could not show anyone else the bone pit. Felt like the damn thing was taunting me. One time, my little sister found it and yelled excitedly and a bit spooked about how there's bones here. Come look. But I was already frustrated by it and just told her, yeah, sure, whatever, just dismissing her. She was not satisfied with this and wanted to share this experience with someone. So she fetched Mom and dragged her by the arm to the spot the bone pit was on. But it was gone. She was perplexed and searched around, parting the grass, even crawling a bit to find it, but to no avail. I told her to just let it be, and Mom had this fake but supportive mom aura about her, telling my sis how she's sure there were a bunch of bones here just now. Oh yes, sure. And this just made my sister more agitated, feeling like no one believed her. I don't know why I didn't tell her about it in more detail. I must have been really cranky that day for some reason, and thinking about walking over there to have the pit disappear again on me just made me crankier. Earlier this year, I met up with my sister and mother and started reminiscing over some old memories, when the focus went to the weird and scary stuff we experienced. so the bone pit came up. Sister told me how frustrated she was to have no one believe her, and I told her then how I actually believed her, but was just cranky since I knew the nature of the pit, that it would disappear before anyone would come up to it. She got animated and wide-eyed and was happy someone actually believed her and had witnessed it too. We wondered if the ground on the meadow was just too bumpy. The pit would just not be seen from any other but one angle. But to be honest, that felt unlikely. It had disappeared on us 3 times in a place we knew really well. 20 years later, it still feels like it was just some apparition, which just appeared and disappeared, with no explanation or reason. A couple of years ago, I got a job as a security officer at a resort with an indoor water park on the overnight shift. During my training there, the night manager, or called John, told me about how the hotel was one of the last places that a child was last seen alive before disappearing. Now, I was more of a skeptic during this time, so I really believed John, and I went about my training. A little later, I began to hear a loud tapping noise at one section of the resort, which sounded like someone tapping on the ductwork in the hallway. I showed one of the hotel engineers, but they were not sure what was causing the tapping sound. Not long after first hearing the tapping, I was checking the hotel fire extinguishers during one shift. One extinguisher was near an emergency exit inside the lower restaurant. The exit door only had a handle on the inside of the door and couldn't be opened from the exterior. That's when there was a loud slamming sound against the door in the dark restaurant. Startled, but thinking that someone was playing a prank, I opened the door to the new fallen slow, but found no footprints going to or from the door. Another time, in the lower restaurant's kitchen, I was walking towards the door into the dining area when I saw something the staff reported for years. A tall shadow figure sliding along the wall through the swinging door. I turned around and walked straight back to the office. I left for a while, but returned. Upon returning, my old shift partner and I started to test this entity. We would sit in the hotel spa and wait for stuff to happen. I felt a coldness touch my elbow in one of the rooms. I had witnessed a shadow figure peer out for a separate room before, disappearing back behind the door frame when I noticed the figure. A few days later, we heard 2 voices. One, a female/childlike voice, and the other deeper, almost demonic-like. And a set of loud footsteps going up the stairs, but found one inside the entry spa after clearing it. Though it was interesting to challenge whatever permanently inhabited the hotel, it would have consequences. Fast forward a month or 2. The hotel was officially closed after being bought out by a competitor. As security staff, we were given 60 days of extended employment under the law. This meant working alone in the middle of the night in an empty building with what seemed to be multiple entities. It all started with random banging sounds that echo through the halls, including the time that my old shift partner and I heard what sounded like a bowling ball falling down the stairs. 2 police officers saw an old food warmer violently shake inside the lower restaurant, the same location that I would later see a floating grey mass. There were 2 times that I heard a loud, childlike scream emanating from the restaurant. I never did investigate either instance, as I was alone and unarmed, with no way to easily call for help. Finally, I began to see shadows inside the water park. These would show up in various locations on the child's splash tower,
but one watched me start my patrols one night. After hearing a loud bang, I looked up to the slide tower to see a solid black mass staring down at me as I walked through the park. I haven't returned to that property, either as an employee or a guest. I was out hiking along the river during the summer when the river water level was low. It's still a good 300 yards at least from one side of the riverbed to the other. While I was focused on taking photos of a rock formation, I started to hear what I thought was a man yelling my name at me from the other side of the river. But when I started looking for the person yelling, I saw no one there, despite being able to hear them. Out of nowhere, I heard the same very loud and distinct guttural male voice screaming, "Help me!" and the sound of breaking branches. I don't know why, but my instincts told me to run as fast as I could in the other direction, despite normally wanting to run towards danger when help was needed. Literally ran until I was lost and hopped someone's back fence, only to be greeted with a ton of bones all over their backyard. Took an hour of running around like a chicken with its head cut off to find my way out again. I've been looking for news reports and police beats for something about an assault or something out there that would explain the screaming, and I've never found anything. I was sleeping over at my friend's house one night. After playing some video games, we decided to go to sleep. Around 3 a.m, I randomly woke up to the sound of what I thought was my friend's mom arguing with someone. All I heard was a woman screaming, "$7? You did it for $7?" about 3 or 4 times. Each time increasing in intensity. My friend was asleep next to me, but no matter how much I shook him, he wouldn't wake up. The most I got was a moan and him brushing me off before rolling over. At first, I felt very awkward, and so I stayed inside my friend's room, not wanting to get involved in his family's business when it wasn't my place to. But when the screaming got even more intense, I thought if I didn't try to stop the situation from escalating, someone was going to get hurt. So, despite how much I did not want to, I got up and walked towards the door. I grabbed the door handles as the lady was beginning to scream again. "You did it for..." I opened the door. In the instant I opened the door, the screaming stopped, and it was dead silent and pitch black, without a single light on in the rest of his house. I flicked on the light. Nobody. I said, "Hello? Is everything okay?" No response. I shut the door, literally dragged my friend off the bed so he had no choice but to wake up, told him what happened, and we stayed up for the rest of the night. The next morning, he asked his parents if something had happened the night before, and they both said no. They had slept all through the night. Genuinely, one of the scariest experiences in my life. I have a few stories from when I was in boarding school in the middle of the jungle in Southeast Asia. We had smaller chalets that fit 2 people clustered all over our college. These chalets had a front door to a smaller common area that leads to 2 separate doors for the 2 bedrooms. It was around 1 or 2 a.m, and I had just finished my revision for the night. When I was about to call it a night, I heard the front open and immediately slam shut. I thought my roommate was having a bad night, so I called his name, to no reply. I thought it was a bit weird, but didn't think much of it to give him some space. I heard the same thing happen to his bedroom door, so I just left it. About 30 minutes later, I started hearing loud banging from his room. It sounded like all of his cupboards and shelves were being opened and slammed shut, super violently. This was when I got up to check on him. I was also worried that someone had gotten into his room and was trying to steal stuff. When I opened his bedroom door, everything looked normal and nobody was in the room. I got freaked out and went back to my room to call my roommate. When he picked up the phone, he told me that he was staying over at his friend's place for the night. That's when the noises started kicking off again. At this point, I'm too freaked out to go back in his room, so I lock my door and stay in my room. I thought that my mind was just playing tricks on me, so I started to look out my window to see if anyone was messing with me. That's when I saw one of the security guards walk by our chalet. After a quick chat, the guard told me that he was called in for a noise complaint and had been hearing the noises as well, and to stay in my room and to not interact or entertain whatever it was. He told me these types of things happen regularly since we were in the middle of the jungle. My life is full of stuff like that. Sometimes it isn't even scary how often it happens, but this time completely shocked me. I couldn't sleep for about a week. So I was home alone. It was late. I was trying to go to bed. But for some reason, I was feeling so terrified all evening. My heart rate was fast. I sweated and was shaking. As I have some problems with panic attacks, I thought it was one of them. So I tried to calm myself, swallowed some pills, and went to bed. Around 1 a.m., I started to wake up because of noises, steps, and knocks. But I was so exhausted, I was falling back asleep almost instantly. Sometime later, the sound stopped, and so did my panic. I thought that it's okay now, and I can fully relax and have some sleep. As expected, I was wrong. Almost immediately after I closed my eyes, I started to have a strange dream. I was in my room, and nothing was different. All my stuff was in place. The only thing that wasn't night outside, it was evening. The sun had already set down and the sky was all red. Actually, it was kind of terrifying. So, I stood up on the bed, decided to drink some water, but it turned out the door was locked. I panicked because I don't even have a lock on my door. I didn't know what to do, so I sat back in bed and started looking for my phone to call someone because the panic level was too high. Suddenly, the door opened. I froze in fear. A strange man in a black outfit, completely bald and without face, was standing there. "You may come in, Grandma." Then, some old lady actually entered my room, came towards me and sat on my bed next to me. Man in the doorway disappeared and the door closed loudly. Granny started talking to me. She looked very sad, almost crying. I wanted to calm her, but she refused and started speaking. "My dear, I'm really sorry for what I'm going to do, but I am completely alone. All my family and friends already died so long ago. I have no one. I'm afraid at this point, you're the only one who can help me." She started crying. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I have no choice." I stood up and laid on my bed. I was really confused and didn't know what was happening. Suddenly, a very bright thought just appeared in my head. It was so fast and strong, like a lightning strike. I realized that an old lady was lying on my bed, in the same position that I fell asleep in. I started choking and woke up almost with a scream. I was so freaked out, I jumped out of my bed, turned on the lights. I couldn't sleep at all that night, so I just watched some YouTube till dawn. Around 7 a.m, I heard an ambulance at our house. I was too scared to go out of my apartment to see what happened. I think I'll never forget that night.
No, not that White House. This is a house that I lived in when I was a teenager. In my family, we refer it to as the White House because that's what it was. A big, split-level white house with a big porch. We lived in a very small town at the time. We lived on the outskirts of town, in a tiny cabin in the woods. On our rides into town for groceries or to go to school, we would ride past a house on Main Street that was different from the other houses. It was different in that it was set way back on its plot, so the front yard was bigger than all of the other houses. It was also different in that it was fairly big compared to the neighbouring houses. It had a long driveway with an old carriage barn at the end of it. No one lived there though. For some reason, I always got an ominous feeling from that house as we rode by it. That summer that I was 12, my mum came home one day and told me that we were moving and that she'd already found a place and that it was in town. The next day, she asked me if I wanted to ride into town with her and she'd show me the house she lined up. I was excited to see where we would be living, since we'd been living in the country since we moved to that town. When she pulled into the long driveway of our new place, the only thing I said to her was, "I don't like this house." It was an ominous house. She was understandably irritated with me and replied, "Well, too bad." A week later, we packed up and moved in. Despite my bad feeling about the house, it was pretty nice inside. We moved into the bottom unit. There was a unit above us that was empty. There were 3 bedrooms and they all had their own full bathrooms. There was also a functional wood-burning fireplace, and I thought that was hella cool. I chose the bedroom off the kitchen, at the back of the house. It had a built-in counter and cabinets. As we were moving in, I started noticing little things about the house. There were floodlights on the living room walls. All of the kitchen cabinets had numbers on the inside of their doors, and all their shelves were lettered. We found a paper taped to the edge of one of these shelves that had Richard Snyder's Meds written on it. That's when my mom told me that the house was the old county mental health facility at one point. I didn't think too much of it. It was pretty chill for about a month, until we started hearing things upstairs. It sounded like someone dragging something across the floor up there. We would hear footsteps and someone walking up the stairs to my unit. At one point, my mum even went to check if the door to the stairs was locked to make sure no one broke in and was squatting up there. It was locked. She called the landlord and asked him if he had anyone working up there, and she said no one had been up there since we moved in. Strange. For the rest of the summer, my stepsister stayed with us. We spent a lot of time outside exploring the new space. We were interested in the carriage barn. We weren't supposed to play in there because it was the garage for the upstairs unit, and we had our own attached garage. But since no one lived up there and the carriage barn was unlocked, my mum said we could go in there but to be careful not to fuck with anything. There was a ladder that went up to the upper part of the barn. It was a very old looking ladder and we didn't trust it, so we didn't look up there. There was also a cute little windowed room in there. There were built-in shelves and a table in the centre of the floor. There was also an old piano in this room. For some reason, when we went into that room, we started to pretend that we were ghost hunters. We were asking who was there, who they were, why they were there. We even left questions on a pad of paper and left it there with a pen. Nothing happened with that though. Mind you, the only thing that we knew about this property was that it was the old country mental health place, and that wasn't that frightening to us. We just felt like that carriage barn had more to it. We stopped playing there after a few days. Nothing significant happened in that house until autumn of that first year there. I had my best friend over after school one day. We were in my room shooting the shit, and we both saw a man in a yellow coat standing at the stove. He was there long enough for us to notice him, but gone before we could see him clearly. That was the only time I ever saw something in that house. The other times were things like the TV going on and off, or the channels changing on their own. If we were listening to CDs, they would skip tracks or the volume would fluctuate. The other was feeling like you weren't alone. Whatever was there never made me feel scared. It felt friendly. Sometimes it felt sad. It felt like it just wanted to let us know it was there, but that we could all live together. It was strange, but nothing that was too bad for me given the shit I've experienced in the past. One thing I didn't like was that my little sister saw something. She was very young at the time. She was 2 years old when she pointed at my mum's closet and told me a guy went in there. The strangest thing that happened in that house happened to me. I was 14 at the time. This is going to sound like sleep paralysis. I'm not completely sure it was. It was around 12 a.m. and I was just about to sleep when my body started to feel like there was static coursing through it. I felt someone sit on the edge of my bed, but I couldn't see them. All I could hear was static and whispers and a car engine starting up. The car sounded like it was coming from the direction of the carriage barn. I also felt inexplicably sad to the core. I tried to scream, but no sound came out of my mouth. I was trying so hard to scream that my throat hurt. I tried to move, but every movement that I made was like stop motion. I couldn't stand up no matter how hard I tried, so I crawled off my bed. I crawled off my bed and towards my bedroom door. I finally made it to the threshold of my doorway and the sun was up. The feeling in my body faded and I slowly stood up. My mum was getting ready to leave for work when she saw me standing there. She said I didn't look so good and asked if I was okay. I told her that I didn't sleep well and she said she'd call the school for me and told me to stay home. I was honestly fucking shook. I didn't know how to explain to her what happened, so I didn't. It wasn't until after we moved out that my mom told me what she learned about the house. There was a man who lived there long before it was the mental health facility. His name was Kenny Whitney. He lived there and he gave piano lessons. He was also a gay man. When he came out to his family, they disowned him. He'd drive his car into the carriage barn, started it up, and breathed in the fumes. He killed himself. I think that's what happened to me, was Kenny trying to tell me who he was, or tell me what happened. When I go back to that town, I feel drawn to that house. I catch myself staring at it when I pass it. I dream about it often. I often find myself wishing I could live in it again. My family, me, my husband, my daughter who just turned a year old, went to a spa hotel right after Christmas 2018 that was supposedly haunted. They even offered ghost tours and ghost packages. I think that sort of thing is fun, but it seemed like a way for the hotel to make extra money, and didn't think that it was really haunted. I went to high school in Colorado, and we visited the Stanley Hotel, etc., and I don't mind spooky stuff at all. Anyway, this hotel is located in a small town with hot springs that was built upon because the water supposedly had healing and medicinal properties. There's not a ton to do there, and the town itself was kind of sad and worn down. We went through the town museum that showed the history of the town and bathhouses and got lunch. When we got back to our hotel, we were down the hall and could hear a radio blasting. It was distorted, it was so loud, and as we got closer, it was not just on one channel, it was scanning through different stations. As we stood outside our door to unlock it, we realised the blasting radio was coming from our room. The maid had come in before we left for lunch, so no one should have been in there. Aside, my dad works for hotels, and there are a couple of things I always do because I'm so used to staying in them. One of which being to turn off the alarm when you arrive, in case the previous occupants set it. We wanted to sleep in, and that was one of our main goals for the trip. My daughter, who used to be a great sleeper, did a good job sleeping the first night. The second night, she was screaming like something was really wrong. She pulled herself up in a pack and played and was jumping up and down and red-faced, like she was desperate to get out. I couldn't get her to calm down. I know she was a baby and it was a new place, but this was unusual. I held her and took her to bed with us, but she, clung to me all night. Last thing, my husband got me a massage as a Christmas gift, so I went down to the grotto area while he took my daughter to the pool. In the waiting area, they were very serious about no talking, no noise, no phones, etc. It is a nice spa, and the massage was expensive. Not the kind of place where they would pull stunts. The therapist took me to my room when it was my turn. She set up a few things and turned on the relaxing music, told me to get undressed and lay on my stomach, and she'd be right back. I got undressed and got under the sheet and was waiting for her to come back. All of a sudden, the music turned to FM radio and got really loud and was searching through a bunch of stations. The therapist knocked and came in. She walked right over to the radio and said, like it happened all the time, "Ghosts have been messing with us all day," and then got back to work, business as usual. I wish I took a ghost tour so I knew more. I thought it was hokey and a marketing ploy, but this hotel was definitely haunted. I kind of want to go back to see if it was a one-time thing, but part of me is genuinely freaked out and wants to stay away. I was about 18 years old when this took place, so only a couple of years ago. One of my best friends, let's call him Nick, used to live a couple towns over. It was the summer, right after we graduated, and we used to hang out all the time. So there was a solid month or two where I would go to his neighbourhood and we would smoke for hours on end in my car. His neighbourhood was a very quaint suburb area with lots of old people living there. We had a couple spots we would regularly park for our sessions, and sometimes we would use this somewhat popular forest trail at the front of his neighbourhood. You would see lots of people running, walking, or biking through there throughout the day. One evening, we decided that we would smoke on this trail. This wasn't out of the ordinary for us at this point. We walked maybe a mile and a half into this trail and casually chatted and joked around as friends do. Eventually, we found a bench where we sat down and started smoking and talking about our days and topics of interest. We saw a middle-aged gentleman briefly jog by us as we sat on the bench. That was the only person we saw during our walk through the trail. By the time we finished smoking, the sun had already gone down and it was getting dark. So we mentioned going back to the car to keep rolling up and continuing our session. We started walking back the way we came from. Nick and I were talking about whatever. I can't remember what we were talking about since it was casual, and we've already gotten into the routine of just shooting the shit all the time. Eventually, as we continued walking, it became eerily darker. So dark I couldn't see much, and I was trying to allow my eyes to adjust to the dark. It got to a point where my eyes were adjusted to it, so the trail had a more bluish hint to it instead of a pitch black. Kind of like how horror movies try portraying the night. Although the forest line around us in the distance was still so dark you couldn't see into it. As Nick and I were making our way through the trail, we got to a point where the trail was straight, with a bend at the end of it, cutting off out of our vision from the rest of the path, and couldn't have been any further than 150 to 200 feet, where the cut-off seemed to be. Nick was on my right side as we were chatting, shoulder to shoulder, walking at the same pace. As we were walking, a small beam of white light seemed to be cutting through the dark shroud of trees off ahead of us, slightly to the left of the trail. Still in front of us, but not on the pathway. In my head, without any concern of the light, I assumed it was moonlight reflecting off the riverbank to the right of us. But as we continued walking towards it, I noticed that the beam of light was moving as well. I was talking at this moment, and as my eyes began locking onto this figure, my words slowly started to drift away into a dead silence. To my surprise, Nick was also locked onto this weird light figure. Our pace slowed down as we were quietly watching this figure emerging from the forest. It was a whitish grey figure that seemed unfazed by the ground as it was moving in our direction in the distance. Nick eventually broke our silence and asked me, "Do you see that?" He knew I was looking at it as well. Neither Nick or I are religious or believe in spirits, and my brain started to try to come up with the most logical answer, so I quickly replied, "I think it's just the moonlight." To which he responds, "I don't think so." Now the figure was maybe 60 feet away, and we could tell it was a human shape. It had legs, it had shoulders that moved in the pace of its stride, although not seeming to be fazed by the pitch black ground beneath it. I started to get scared. It looked like a woman in a white dress walking towards us with white legs, arms, and head, although no hair I could see. Knowing all too well what that means in horror movies, my mind began racing for a more rational conclusion. I thought to myself, maybe it's a man in a white coat walking on the trail, but that only left me with the question as to why a man would be walking into the trail this late at night. My heart began pounding as the woman with a white glow started coming closer and closer. I tried so hard to make a face out in the night, but I could only see the distinct white figure of her. She had the glow of the moon. Everything from head to toe was all white. Nick and I at this point halted in our tracks at the same time, locking onto this glowing woman who was walking directly into our path. We could tell that if she were to continue walking towards us, she would have to walk through us. She was dead center on the path, continuously walking closer and closer. At this point, I was so terrified and completely suspended in disbelief. Besides the odd occasion of a door shutting at random in my house, I've never seen what seemed to be a spirit. So clearly, I could see this woman in a dress. Although I was scared out of my mind, an overwhelming sense of tranquility was coming over me, like I had nothing to be afraid of. The woman became so close, she couldn't have been more than 20, maybe 30 feet in front of us at this moment. So close you could guess her height, which was tall enough to be somewhat eye level, with her yet no eyes or distinct facial features, besides possibly the shape of her nose. I can't begin to express how clear and close the woman got to us. Dead in our tracks, eyes locked on her. We sat there silently, watching her getting ready to walk in between us. Without any thought to it, simultaneously, Nick and I locked eyes with each other. The look of horror and confusion in his eyes reassured me that he was seeing the same thing as me, as he quickly blurted, "Dude, what is that?" We quickly shot our eyes back in front of us, and before we could even prepare for her, she was gone. Completely vanished, as if there wasn't an all-white glowing woman walking no farther than 20 feet ahead of us. We began speed walking in silence. Neither of us wanted to seem scared at first. So much was running through my mind, just trying to comprehend what just happened. Eventually I spoke up. All I said was, "Let's go." And we both started running as fast as we could, without one of us getting ahead of the other. I lost track of how far in we were at that point, but it was definitely more than half a mile in. But as fast as we ran, it seemed we were at the end of the trail within seconds. This whole ordeal was probably around only a minute long, but from the sheer horror of it, it felt like time came to a standstill. We quickly got into my car, parked near the trail entrance, and I hightailed it back to his house. Nick began saying, "Bro, what just happened? We both saw that, right?" And we began confirming with each other everything we just witnessed. He asked what we saw. Why did we see her? Why did she show herself to us? What does this mean? My understanding of reality was completely altered. It felt like such a dystopian reality when it occurred, like we stumbled into a limbo of some sort. To this day, I have no idea what else it could have been. It was so real, and the area became so unnatural when this happened. What creeps me out the most and comforts my sanity is that we both saw it. We both saw a woman in a dress, glowing white, walking towards us with an unfazed, uninterrupted stride. like it wasn't actually walking on the ground. We didn't hear footsteps or anything. I suggested that due to there being a lot of old folks who lived in that area, that it's a spirit of someone who once lived there and possibly enjoyed the trail in their youth. I've also heard that the area was a popular ground during the Civil War. Nick and I reminisce occasionally about our experience and have even attempted going back with the intention of seeing her again. However, when we did, I was overwhelmed with a gut feeling to turn back around before we saw something we didn't really want to see again. Since then, I've been more open to the idea of spirits and still can't really wrap my head around what we saw. We tell this story to our friends and loved ones, but when we do, it doesn't have the same surrealness to it. They usually laugh it off as yet another wild story, rather than a truly warping experience. I wonder if anyone else has similar stories or experiences. I'd be interested to hear your feedback and your stories as well.